My 7-year-old daughter's imaginary friend, Mr. Patches, kept telling her that her baby brother's eyes needed to be fixed so he could see him too. Then one night at 3 a.m., I found her standing over his crib holding scissors, whispering that it was the only way he'd ever forgive her. I consistently believed my daughter, Michaela, was merely reserved, which explained her limited communication. However, I later understood it stemmed from the company she kept. You see, for as long as I could recall, Michaela never had many companions and found social interaction challenging. I will forever remember the day my heart ached the most, observing her arrange a tea party with vacant chairs, conversing with them, and pretending someone was amused by her jokes. It was around this period that Michaela started spending time with an adult male figure she called Mr. Patches. Mr. Patches was her invisible companion, and initially, he seemed like a divine blessing. He instilled in her a self-assurance that children typically gain from peers, not from their relatives. I still recall my emotions when Michaela arrived home with her very first birthday party invitation. Sarah wept openly in the kitchen. Our precious child was finally being included. Yet, within a couple of months, Michaela's existence began to revolve entirely around Mr. Patches. She started engaging in extensive conversations in her room, where we could distinctly hear both sides of the exchange. She would subtly alter her voice for Mr. Patches. Her new school friends declined to visit our residence because Mr. Patches made them uneasy. Michaela would utter statements like, "Mr. Patches dislikes how loudly you breathe." I mentioned this to my wife one evening, and she retorted, "Forget them. If they cannot tolerate Michaela's eccentricities, they do not merit her friendship anyway." I concurred, as we were discussing our cherished Michaela. It wasn't until Sarah discovered Michaela's drawings that she finally concluded there was a serious issue, for there, on the sheets of paper, was the most repulsive image I had ever encountered. Michaela had sketched a wholesome family portrait of us. I would have smiled, as I always did when she depicted us. But this time, another presence joined us. Behind us loomed a tall, shadowy entity with multiple appendages and eyes that streamed down its limbs. Our infant son, Jake, also had X marks over his eyes. Michaela had inscribed at the bottom, "Mr. Patches says Jake will join him soon." We attempted to remain composed and questioned Michaela about the illustrations. She immediately brightened, displaying the broadest smile we had ever witnessed. "Yes, Daddy. Isn't it wonderful? Mr. Patches now resides within all of us." My wife and I could not have exited the room more swiftly. Sarah actually hyperventilated and collapsed to her knees, sobbing, asking me what was amiss with our child. I had no idea how to respond to that inquiry. Sarah and I felt powerless, and during the time we deliberated on what to do about our child, events took an unforeseen turn. It commenced when our motion sensors activated at 3 a.m. each morning. When I reviewed the security footage, I observed Michaela traversing the house, unlatching windows and unlocking doors. She would stand there, smiling eerily, while gesturing for something or someone to enter. She would wait a few seconds, then close the door and embrace empty space. I was so terrified of what she was becoming. I didn't even know how to address it with her, so I simply didn't, until later that day when Michaela attempted to harm our newborn baby. It was feeding time, and Sarah glanced away for a mere second. That was all it took for Michaela to discreetly add some eye drops into his sippy cup. She concealed the drops behind her back and smiled innocently, claiming it was just water. Sarah became alarmed and tossed the cup into the sink. She opened her mouth to reprimand Michaela, but Michaela preempted her. "You are ruining everything. I despise you," she shrieked so loudly I thought the windows would shatter. Sarah instantly trembled. I had never before seen her look at Michaela with such apprehension. It was then that I realized we had allowed matters to escalate too far. I informed Michaela that she needed to apologize to her mother and that she could not persist in this manner. Her actions were causing us distress. I braced myself for her to burst into tears or even become nonverbal, but no. Instead, she lunged at Sarah and scratched her face until blood appeared. "You are merely envious because he favors me over you." As soon as I pulled her away, she dashed to her room and secured the door with her dresser. From outside, I could hear her repeating, "I am sorry. I love you. I am sorry. I love you," incessantly. At that point, Michaela was the least of my concerns. I took Sarah to urgent care and had her injuries treated. She kept imploring me to assist our daughter, insisting she was not herself. I assured her we would address it once she was stable. I wish I had known that it would be the last time I would ever see my daughter again. The girl I encountered the next day was not Michaela, or at least, not truly. Anyway, I was sound asleep at 2 a.m. when I detected static on the baby monitor. My heart pounded as I raced to Jake's room at full speed, wondering what Michaela had done to him. From the hallway, I could discern a large shadow emerging by his crib. What I witnessed next made my insides churn. Michaela was standing over his crib with scissors in her hands. Her gaze was completely unfocused, as if she were sleepwalking. Mr. Patches says if we mend his eyes, he can always perceive him, she uttered. I tried to seize the scissors, but she resisted with a ferocity I had never seen from her. She continued to cry. Mr. Patches says this is the sole way he will pardon me. He says Jake must perceive him. I could hear the sirens outside. Michaela continued cackling and repeating, he is touching your shoulder right now, Daddy. Can you not feel his digits? The cold metal of the scissors pressed against my palm as I finally wrested them from Michaela's grasp. My hands quivered as I flung them across the room, far from both children. Jake's terrified wails filled the nursery while Michaela thrashed in my embrace, her small body possessed by an unnatural strength for a 7-year-old. I carried her, kicking and screaming, to her bedroom, my heart breaking with each stride. Sarah met us in the hallway, her face still bandaged from earlier, and together we managed to get Michaela into her room. She immediately began hurling objects at us. Books, toys, anything within reach. We retreated to the hallway and held the door shut while she pounded against it from the inside. Through the door, we could hear her voice shift, dropping to that deeper tone she used for Mr. Patches, then reverting to her normal voice, pleading and weeping. The conversation she was having with her invisible companion sent shivers down my spine. Sarah pressed her face against my shoulder, her body trembling. The sirens I had heard earlier grew louder, then ceased. Our neighbor must have called after hearing the commotion. I left Sarah holding the door and went to explain to the officers that everything was under control, that our daughter was having a challenging night, but we were addressing it as a family matter. They appeared skeptical, but eventually departed after I repeatedly assured them that everyone was safe. When I returned, Sarah had relocated Jake's crib into our bedroom. She had also pushed our heavy dresser against Michaela's door from the outside. The pounding had ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence that was somehow worse. We spent the remainder of the night taking turns observing Jake, neither of us able to sleep. Morning arrived with Michaela singing softly in her room. It was a lullaby she used to sing to Jake, but the lyrics were now altered. She sang about eyes that could perceive everything, about companions who resided in the walls, about infants who needed to be fixed. Sarah prepared breakfast while I stood guard outside Michaela's door, listening to every sound. When I finally opened the door, Michaela was seated in the center of her room, surrounded by more drawings. These were more unsettling than before. The dark silhouette of Mr. Patches dominated every page, his multiple arms extending toward crude depictions of our family. In some illustrations, Jake had no eyes at all. In others, Mr. Patches seemed to be emerging from within our bodies. Michaela looked up at me with a saccharine smile that churned my stomach. She behaved as if nothing had transpired the previous night. When I inquired about the scissors, she tilted her head in confusion and claimed she did not recall any scissors. But then her expression darkened, and she added that Mr. Patches remembered everything. I collected all the drawings while she watched silently. As I reached for the last one, she seized my wrist with surprising force. Her fingernails dug into my skin as she whispered that Mr. Patches disliked when people touched his images. I pulled away and left swiftly, securing the door behind me. Sarah and I huddled in the kitchen, attempting to devise our next course of action. We could not keep Michaela confined to her room indefinitely, but we also could not jeopardize Jake's safety. Sarah proposed taking Jake to her mother's house for a few days while we addressed Michaela, but I worried about separating our family. We were still deliberating options when we heard Michaela's door open. The dresser we had pushed against it lay on its side in the hallway. Michaela stood in her doorway, still in her pajamas from the previous night. She walked past us without a word and proceeded to the kitchen, where she calmly poured herself a bowl of cereal. Sarah and I watched in stunned silence as she ate breakfast like any other morning. After finishing her cereal, Michaela turned to us and announced that Mr. Patches had informed her of the regulations. If we adhered to the regulations, everything would be satisfactory. The regulations were straightforward. No locked doors, no removing Jake, and no further discussion of Mr. Patches unless he desired it. She recited these regulations in a monotonous voice, as if reading from a script. I began to object, but Michaela's face contorted into an expression of pure fury. She swept her bowl off the table, sending it crashing to the floor. Then, just as swiftly, her face reverted to that eerily calm expression. She stepped over the broken ceramic and returned to her room. Sarah began packing a bag for Jake while I tidied the mess. We decided that getting him somewhere secure was our primary concern. Something feels amiss about how rapidly the parents shifted from believing Mr. Patches was assisting their solitary daughter to abruptly discovering those unsettling illustrations. I wonder if there were warning signs they overlooked or chose to disregard because they were simply so pleased she finally had a companion. As I swept up the ceramic fragments, I noticed Michaela observing from the hallway. She said nothing, merely stared with those unfocused eyes. The remainder of the morning was a tense ballet of attempting to act normally while keeping Jake away from Michaela. She followed us from room to room, always maintaining a short distance, but never allowing us out of her sight. When Sarah tried to dress Jake, Michaela stood in the doorway, humming that distorted lullaby. I suggested taking Michaela outdoors to play, hoping to afford Sarah time to depart with Jake, but Michaela refused to go anywhere without her infant brother. She stated Mr. Patches wished them to remain together. When I tried to insist, she began scratching her own arms until they reddened. I immediately retreated. By afternoon, the situation had become intolerable. Michaela had positioned herself in the living room where she could view both the front entrance and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. She sat there with a pile of Jake's playthings, arranging them in peculiar patterns on the floor. Every time we attempted to move Jake, she would commence that dreadful screaming again. Sarah finally broke down. She confronted Michaela directly, kneeling before her and trying to reason with her. She told Michaela how much we cherished her, how we wished to help her, how Mr. Patches was not real and could not harm us. Michaela listened silently, then extended her hand and touched Sarah's bandaged face with unsettling gentleness. The touch seemed to trigger something within Michaela. Her entire body began to tremble, and tears streamed down her face. For a moment, I saw my little girl again, frightened and bewildered. She collapsed into Sarah's arms, sobbing and apologizing repeatedly. Sarah held her tightly, weeping too, and I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps we could reach her. But the moment quickly vanished. Michaela suddenly became rigid in Sarah's arms. Her crying ceased abruptly, and she pushed Sarah away with violent force. She stood up and announced that Mr. Patches was now extremely displeased. He did not appreciate being called not real. He was going to demonstrate just how real he was. Michaela walked to the center of the living room and began rotating in slow circles, her arms outstretched. Her movements were mechanical, like a marionette. Sarah and I watched, paralyzed, as she completed 3 full rotations before stopping abruptly. She tilted her head at an unnatural angle and stared directly at the corner of the ceiling. I followed her gaze but perceived nothing. The hairs on my arms bristled as Michaela nodded slowly, as if receiving instructions. She then walked to the bookshelf and began extracting books one by one, examining each cover before discarding it. Sarah clutched Jake tighter, retreating toward the hallway. The systematic manner in which Michaela searched through our possessions sent a chill through my veins. She moved from the bookshelf to the entertainment center, opening every drawer and cabinet. Her small hands worked with disturbing precision, never rushing, never hesitating. When she located what she sought, an old photo album, she smiled, that same sweet smile that no longer reached her eyes. She flipped through the pages until she found our wedding photographs, her finger tracing over Sarah's face in each picture, pressing harder with each image until she was scratching at the photographs themselves. I stepped forward to intervene, but she sensed my movement and clutched the album to her chest. Sarah made a decision. While Michaela was preoccupied with the photographs, she slipped down the hallway with Jake. I heard our bedroom door close softly and the click of the lock. Michaela's head snapped up at the sound. She dropped the album and started toward the hallway, but I obstructed her path. She attempted to maneuver around me, but I mirrored her movements. Her frustration intensified with each thwarted attempt. Finally, she stopped and looked up at me with those unfocused eyes. Her mouth opened and closed several times, as if she was engaged in a silent conversation. Then, she nodded and returned to the living room. I believed I had achieved a minor victory until I observed her dragging a kitchen chair toward the hallway. She positioned it against the wall and ascended, reaching for the air vent near the ceiling. Her small fingers worked at the screws with her fingernails. I pulled her down, chair and all, but she immediately scrambled back up. This continued for what felt like hours, me pulling her down, her climbing back up. Each time she seemed less like my daughter and more like something else inhabiting her form. Her movements became increasingly erratic. Her breathing labored. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool temperature. Sarah emerged from the bedroom, having settled Jake in his crib. She surveyed the scene. The scattered books, torn photographs, overturned chair, and her face hardened with resolve. She approached Michaela slowly, hands visible and empty. Michaela watched her mother's approach with the intensity of a predator. When Sarah came within arm's reach, Michaela lunged, not at Sarah, but past her, racing toward our bedroom. Sarah and I gave chase, but Michaela had always been swift. She reached our door and began pounding on it with both fists. The pounding had a rhythm to it, 3 quick beats, pause. 2 slow beats, pause, repeat. It was deliberate, purposeful. From inside the room, Jake began crying. Michaela's pounding intensified, her knuckles reddening from the impact. I grabbed her around the waist and carried her away from the door, her legs flailing wildly. She went limp in my arms, becoming dead weight. I adjusted my grip, and that's when she attacked. Her elbow connected with my solar plexus, expelling the air from my lungs. I doubled over, releasing her. She sprinted back to the door, but Sarah intercepted her. The struggle that ensued was heartbreaking. Mother and daughter grappling in the hallway. Sarah attempting to restrain without inflicting harm. Michaela fighting with no such reservations. She bit, scratched, and kicked. Sarah's bandages came loose, revealing the angry red marks from the previous assault. I recovered and helped Sarah carry Michaela back to the living room. We seated her on the couch, each holding an arm. She sat perfectly still between us, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Then she began to hum. The same twisted lullaby from earlier, but slower, more deliberate. As she hummed, her body temperature seemed to decrease. Her skin felt cold and clammy beneath my grasp. Sarah noticed it, too, her eyes widening with apprehension. We exchanged worried glances over Michaela's head. This transcended normal childhood conduct, even psychological disturbance. The humming ceased. Michaela turned to look at me, then at Sarah. Her eyes were completely dilated, the pupils so vast her irises were barely discernible. She smiled, revealing all her teeth. Then she spoke in that deeper voice, the one she used for Mr. Patches, but this time it emanated from her own mouth, without her lips moving correctly. The words were garbled, incomprehensible, but the tone was clear, menacing, ancient, wrong. Sarah's grip on Michaela's arm loosened in shock. That was all the opportunity needed. Michaela wrenched free and ran to the kitchen. We found her standing on the counter, reaching for the knife block. I swept it out of reach, just as her fingers brushed the handles. She spun toward me, nearly losing her balance. Sarah caught her as she fell, and we carried her thrashing form back to the living room. This pattern persisted throughout the day. Michaela would appear to calm down. We would relax slightly, and she would make another attempt to reach Jake or find something perilous. Each attempt was more inventive than the last. She tried to climb out windows, unscrew light fixtures, access the garage through the laundry room. By evening, Sarah and I were exhausted. We had skipped lunch, afraid to lower our guard long enough to eat. Jake required feeding, but we could not risk taking him out of the locked bedroom with Michaela observing our every movement. We were at an impasse. That's when Michaela performed something unexpected. She walked to her toy chest and retrieved her favorite stuffed rabbit. She had possessed it since infancy, carrying it everywhere until recently. She held it up, examining it as if seeing it for the first time. Then, she began extracting the stuffing. She worked methodically, creating a pile of white fluff on the floor. When the rabbit was empty, she inverted it and placed it on her head like a grotesque cap. She looked at us expectantly, as if awaiting a reaction. When we provided none, she shrugged and began gathering the stuffing. She shaped the fluff into small spheres and arranged them in a circle on the floor. In the center, she placed Jake's favorite pacifier. How she had acquired it, I had no idea. She sat cross-legged beside her creation and closed her eyes. Her lips moved in silent conversation. Sarah utilized this diversion to slip back to our bedroom. I heard her speaking softly to Jake, likely feeding him. I kept watch over Michaela, who remained motionless, save for her moving lips. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. As darkness fully descended, Michaela's behavior shifted again. She abandoned her stuffing circle and began activating every light in the house. She moved from room to room, flipping switches, plugging in lamps, even turning on flashlights and positioning them around. Soon, our home was ablaze with illumination. She returned to the living room and surveyed her work with satisfaction. Then she proceeded to the front door and began unlocking it. I relocked it. She unlocked it again. This continued until I physically held the deadbolt in place. She relinquished and moved to the windows. One by one, she unlatched every window in the house. I followed behind, relatching them. It was like a twisted game, but her expression remained gravely serious. When she had tried every window, she returned to the first one and started again. Sarah emerged from the bedroom looking haggard. We needed a strategy. We could not continue this indefinitely. Michaela is employing every creepy child tactic in the book, spinning like a damaged toy, ascending walls, transforming the house into a beacon. Someone should inform her that less is more when terrorizing your family. She suggested contacting her sister, perhaps taking shifts so one of us could rest, but Michaela must have sensed our planning. She positioned herself between us and the telephone. The night wore on in a blur of constant vigilance. Michaela's attempts grew more frantic as the hours passed. She tried to barricade us in separate rooms, to stack furnishings to reach elevated places, to access the attic through the hall closet. Each failure seemed to fuel her resolve. Around midnight, she abruptly ceased. She stood in the center of the living room, swaying slightly. Her eyes rolled back, revealing only whites. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. Then she collapsed. Sarah rushed to her, checking her pulse and respiration. Both were rapid but strong. We carried her to her bed, hoping exhaustion had finally overcome whatever was driving her. We took turns standing guard at her door while the other checked on Jake. But Michaela was not finished. At precisely 3 a.m., she sat bolt upright in bed. Her movements were mechanical. As she stood and walked to her door, she tried the handle, found it secured from the outside, and began scratching at the wood. The sound was rhythmic, methodical, maddening. The scratching persisted for exactly 1 hour, then silence. Sarah and I held our breath, waiting. The doorknob rattled violently, then nothing. We heard her window slide open. I rushed outside to find her halfway out, her small body contorting to fit through the opening. I pushed her back inside and nailed the window shut. The sound of the hammer seemed to infuriate her. She flew at me, all fingernails and teeth. I held her at arm's length while she flailed. Sarah appeared with a blanket, and we wrapped her tightly, creating a makeshift straitjacket. We sat with her on her bed, one on each side, as she struggled against the blanket. Her strength was unnatural for her size. The blanket began to tear. We rewrapped her, using sheets this time. She chewed through them. Dawn broke with all three of us exhausted. Michaela had finally ceased struggling, but her eyes remained open, unblinking. She lay between us like a statue, only the rise and fall of her chest indicating life. Sarah stroked her hair, tears streaming down her face. When the sun was fully risen, Michaela blinked. She turned to look at Sarah, then at me. For a moment, her eyes seemed clear. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then her face contorted. She began convulsing, her body rigid and shaking. The seizure lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. When it concluded, she lay still, breathing heavily. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful. We waited, afraid to move, afraid to hope. Then she opened her eyes and smiled. Not the sweet smile of our daughter, but that other smile, the wrong smile. She sat up slowly, the torn sheets falling away. She looked at her hands, as if surprised to see them. Then she looked at us with an expression of mild curiosity. She tilted her head, studying our faces. When she spoke, her voice was her own, but the words were not. She informed us Mr. Patches was disappointed. We had not adhered to the regulations. Now things would have to change. She stood and walked calmly to her dresser, selecting garments. She dressed herself with meticulous precision, choosing items she had never combined before. Sarah and I watched, uncertain how to respond to this new development. Michaela appeared calm, controlled, but somehow that was worse than her frantic behavior. She finished dressing and turned to face us, hands clasped in front of her like a miniature adult. She informed us that Mr. Patches had decided to be more direct. No more games, no more warnings. If we did not provide him with what he desired, he would seize it. She delivered this message in a matter-of-fact tone, as if discussing the weather. I inquired what Mr. Patches wanted. Michaela's smile broadened. She walked to her toy chest and retrieved a piece of paper and crayons. She began drawing with swift, confident strokes. When she finished, she held up the picture. It depicted Jake, but his eyes were scribbled out with black crayon. Sarah snatched the drawing and shredded it. Michaela watched impassively, then began drawing another and another, each image more disturbing than the last. Jake with X's for eyes. Jake surrounded by dark figures. Jake alone in darkness. We collected the drawings as quickly as she could produce them. She did not seem bothered by this, simply continued creating more. Her crayon moved across the paper with inhuman speed. Soon, the floor was strewn with torn pieces despite our efforts. The doorbell chimed, startling all of us. Michaela's head snapped toward the sound. She dropped her crayon and walked purposefully toward the door. I intercepted her, restraining her while Sarah checked the peephole. It was the mailman with a package. Sarah signed for it quickly and closed the door. Michaela observed the entire interaction with intense focus. When the door closed, she nodded as if confirming something to herself. She returned to her drawing, but now she was sketching the mailman. The accuracy was unsettling. She had only glimpsed him for seconds, but every detail was perfect. His uniform, his face, even the way he held his electronic signature pad. She drew him repeatedly, each image identical to the last. I realized we required assistance, professional assistance. But Michaela seemed to perceive my thoughts. She stopped drawing and fixed me with that unblinking stare. She shook her head slowly, deliberately. The message was unequivocal: no outsiders. Sarah vanished into our bedroom again to check on Jake. I heard her gasp. I rushed to see what was wrong, but Michaela blocked my path. Her small body should not have been able to impede me, but something about her stance made me hesitate. Sarah emerged carrying Jake, her face pale. She showed me his sleeper. There were tiny handprints on it, too small to be Michaela's. They resembled infant handprints, but Jake's hands had been tucked inside. The prints were made with something dark and oily. Michaela clapped her hands in delight. She pointed at Jake, then at herself, then made a connecting gesture. Sarah clutched Jake tighter and backed away. Michaela's delight turned to frustration. She stamped her foot and returned to her drawings. This time, she drew our house. Every room, every detail laid out like a blueprint, but there were additions, dark shapes in corners, shadows where shadows should not be, and in every room, the figure of Mr. Patches observing. The day progressed in a tense stalemate. Michaela continued her drawings while we took turns safeguarding Jake and watching her. She seemed content to draw for now, but we knew it would not endure. The pile of disturbing images grew higher. As afternoon approached, Michaela suddenly ceased drawing. She gathered all her pictures and began arranging them on the floor in a specific pattern. It resembled a map or a timeline. She studied her work, made a few adjustments, then sat back, satisfied. She announced that Mr. Patches had revealed everything to her, past, present, and future. She knew what would transpire if we did not comply. She pointed to specific drawings as she explained, her voice adopting that eerie monotone quality. According to her, or rather Mr. Patches, Jake was exceptional. He could perceive things others could not, but his vision was restricted by his physical eyes. Mr. Patches wished to rectify that, to open Jake's true perception. The procedure was simple, she assured us. Jake would feel nothing. Sarah and I exchanged horrified glances. Our 7-year-old was calmly discussing mutilating her infant brother as if it were a medical operation. I knelt beside her, attempting once more to reach the daughter I knew was still present somewhere within. I reminded her of all our joyful memories. Her first day of school, teaching her to ride a bicycle, bedtime stories, and goodnight kisses. Her expression remained unaltered. I spoke about how much we loved her, how we would always love her no matter what. For just a second, something flickered in her eyes, a trace of the real Michaela, but it vanished so swiftly I might have imagined it. She patted my hand condescendingly and told me those recollections belonged to someone else now. She stood and began collecting her drawings. She stacked them neatly and placed them in her toy chest. Then she announced she was hungry. Such a normal request after such abnormal behavior. Sarah made her a sandwich while I stood guard. Michaela ate mechanically, taking identical bites and chewing the same number of times. When she finished, she meticulously wiped her mouth and placed her plate in the sink. She thanked Sarah politely, her manners impeccable. But somehow wrong. She returned to the living room and sat on the couch. She folded her hands in her lap and closed her eyes. To any observer, she would appear to be a well-behaved child, taking a rest. But we knew better. We could see her lips moving slightly, continuing that endless conversation. As evening approached, the atmosphere grew heavier. Michaela opened her eyes and announced that Mr. Patches was growing impatient. He had been very patient thus far, but his patience had limitations. She suggested we make our decision soon. Sarah inquired what decision. Michaela smiled that wrong smile again. The decision to allow Mr. Patches to assist Jake, of course. It would be so much simpler if we cooperated. If we did not, well, Mr. Patches had other methods, less pleasant methods. She stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting again, painting the sky in crimson and violet hues. She pressed her palm against the glass and whispered something. When she removed her hand, there was an oily handprint left behind, just like the ones on Jake's sleeper. She turned back to us, her face serene. She informed us that Mr. Patches would visit tonight. He wished to meet Jake properly. We could make it easy or difficult, but it would happen regardless. She recommended we choose easy. Sarah and I knew we had to act. We could not endure another night like the last one. While Michaela was preoccupied at the window, Sarah slipped back to our room. Michaela's drawing abilities are far too advanced for a 7-year-old. Perfect details of the mailman after seeing him for just a few seconds. I am truly curious about what is enabling her to perform actions she could not before, such as possessing this strange strength and artistic talent. I heard her on the phone, her voice low and urgent. She was contacting her sister. Michaela must have heard, too. She walked calmly to the kitchen and returned with scissors, not threatening us, simply holding them casually. She sat back on the couch and began cutting shapes from paper. Each snip of the scissors was deliberate, precise. She cut out paper dolls, a family of 4, but the baby doll had no eyes, just empty apertures where they should be. She held up her creation and made them dance, the eyeless baby doll leading the others in their paper dance. The paper dolls fluttered to the floor as Michaela stood abruptly. She walked to the hallway closet and began pulling out winter coats. Despite the warm evening, she arranged them on the floor in a specific pattern, creating pathways between rooms. Sarah ended her call with her sister mid-conversation, and we both watched, attempting to decipher her intention. Michaela placed shoes at strategic points along her coat pathways, then stepped back to admire her work. She nodded with satisfaction and began traversing the paths, careful not to step outside the boundaries she had created. At each shoe marker, she paused and performed a different gesture, touching her forehead, spinning in place, crouching down. I realized she was constructing some form of ritual. Sarah must have had the same thought because she rushed to gather up the coats. Michaela shrieked and threw herself at Sarah's legs, knocking her off balance. They tumbled to the floor together, Sarah protecting her injured face while Michaela clawed at the coats. I pulled Michaela away, and she went limp again, employing that same dead weight technique. This time, I was prepared for her elbow strike and adjusted my grip. She attempted to bite my arm through my shirt. Her teeth could not penetrate the fabric, but the pressure was painful. I carried her to the bathroom and placed her in the empty tub, hoping the confined space would calm her. Instead, she began turning the faucets, alternating between hot and cold water. Steam rose as the temperature fluctuated wildly. She cupped water in her hands and flung it at the walls, creating wet patterns. When I reached to turn off the water, she grabbed my wrist with both hands and dug her nails in deep enough to draw blood. Sarah appeared with towels, and we managed to get Michaela out of the tub. Her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her small frame. She shivered but smiled, water dripping from her hair. She announced that the preparations were almost complete. Mr. Patches would be so pleased. We got her into dry clothes while she remained unnaturally still, like dressing a mannequin. Her skin was cold to the touch despite the warm bathwater. Once dressed, she walked calmly back to the living room and resumed her position on the couch, hands folded, eyes closed. The house felt different now. The air seemed heavier, shadows longer. Every small sound made us jump. Sarah and I took positions on either side of Michaela, ready for whatever came next. The waiting was agony. As darkness fell completely, Michaela's eyes snapped open. She stood and walked to the center of the room. She began moving her hands in complex patterns as if she were weaving invisible threads. Her movements were precise, practiced. How long had she been rehearsing this? She started speaking in that strange, garbled language again, her voice fluctuating between her normal tone and the deeper Mr. Patch's voice. The words seemed to linger in the air, making my skin crawl. Sarah grabbed my hand, her palms sweaty with fear. Michaela suddenly stopped mid-gesture. She cocked her head, listening to something we could not hear. Then she smiled and nodded. She turned to us with an expression of triumph. Mr. Patches had arrived. She walked toward our bedroom with purposeful steps. We followed, knowing we could not allow her near Jake. At the door, she placed both palms flat against the wood and began pushing. Not pounding or hitting, just steady pressure. The door creaked under her small hands. I pulled her back, and she spun around, her movements fluid and strange. She ducked under my arm and pressed against the door again. This time, she began humming, the vibrations seeming to travel through the wood. From inside, Jake began crying. Sarah tried to lead Michaela away with gentle touches and soothing motions, but Michaela remained fixed at the door. Her humming grew louder, more insistent. The sound was wrong, making my teeth ache. Jake's cries intensified. That's when I noticed the odor. Something oily and organic, like decaying vegetation mixed with machine oil. It seemed to emanate from Michaela herself. Sarah noticed, too, her nose wrinkling in disgust. The scent grew stronger the louder Michaela hummed. We needed to break whatever hold Mr. Patches had on her. I remembered the drawings, how upset she had been when I touched them. I ran to her room and grabbed her toy chest, bringing it to the hallway. I began pulling out all her Mr. Patches drawings. Michaela's humming stopped instantly. She whirled around, her face contorted with rage. She lunged for the drawings, but I held them high above her reach. She jumped and clawed at the air, making inhuman sounds of frustration. I started tearing the drawings. Each rip seemed to cause Michaela physical pain. She clutched her stomach, doubling over, but I kept tearing, destroying every image of Mr. Patches, every disturbing picture of Jake. Sarah watched in horror as our daughter writhed on the floor. When the last drawing was destroyed, Michaela went completely still. She lay on her side, knees drawn to her chest, breathing in short gasps. The terrible odor began to dissipate. Jake's crying slowed to whimpers. Sarah knelt beside Michaela, afraid to touch her. We waited, watching for any sign of movement. Finally, Michaela's breathing normalized. She slowly uncurled and sat up. When she looked at us, her eyes were focused, present, the real Michaela. She burst into tears, crawling into Sarah's arms. Her sobs were different now, the genuine cries of a frightened child, not the manipulative wails from before. She clung to Sarah, her small body shaking. Sarah held her tight, tears streaming down her own face. I unlocked our bedroom door and checked on Jake. He was fine, though clearly distressed. I brought him out, and Michaela looked at her infant brother with clear, loving eyes. She reached out tentatively, and Sarah allowed her to gently touch Jake's hand. The remainder of the night was spent in vigilant calm. Michaela showed no signs of her previous behavior. She was quieter than before, more clingy, but otherwise appeared to be herself. She played with conventional toys, drew cheerful pictures, and displayed appropriate affection toward Jake. Sarah's sister came to stay with us, providing additional support and oversight. We child-proofed the house to an extreme degree, installing locks and alarms on everything. Michaela did not object to these alterations, seeming to comprehend they were necessary. I researched child psychologists who specialized in trauma and dissociative behaviors. We required professional assistance, but finding the appropriate person was crucial. The initial consultations were disappointing. Doctors who wished to immediately medicate or hospitalize. We needed someone who would collaborate with our family. Finally, we located Dr. Chun, who consented to intensive home sessions. She observed Michaela in her environment, slowly building trust. Michaela was hesitant at first, but gradually became more open. The therapy sessions were arduous, often leaving all of us emotionally drained. Dr. Chun explained that imaginary companions could sometimes become maladaptive coping mechanisms, especially in children struggling with social connections. The violent conduct suggested deeper issues that would require time to address. She recommended continued therapy and careful monitoring. Michaela began attending a new school, one with smaller classes and more individualized attention. We were candid with the administration about her challenges, and they developed a support plan. She made friends slowly, supervised playdates that proceeded well. At home, we established strict routines. Michaela thrived on predictability, knowing what to anticipate each day. She assisted with simple chores, spent supervised time with Jake, and engaged in structured activities. The wild child who had terrorized us seemed like a distant nightmare, but we never forgot. Sarah and I took turns sleeping, always one parent awake and alert. We removed all scissors, sharp objects, and potentially hazardous items from Michaela's reach. Jake's nursery had multiple locks and a baby monitor with motion sensors. Months passed with steady improvement. Michaela's therapy sessions became less intense, more focused on developing healthy coping skills. She learned to identify and articulate her emotions appropriately. The mention of Mr. Patches became infrequent, then ceased entirely. One evening, while tucking Michaela into bed, she grasped my hand. She looked up at me with clear, serious eyes and apologized for frightening us. She said she knew Mr. Patches was not real now, that he had represented her fear and loneliness speaking. I embraced her tightly, telling her we loved her no matter what. The healing was not linear. There were setbacks, moments of regression, times when we observed vestiges of the old behavior. But with consistency, therapy, and boundless patience, our family discovered a new normal. Michaela grew stronger, more self-assured in healthy ways. Jake remained unharmed throughout it all, developing normally despite the early trauma. As he matured, we watched carefully for any signs of impact, but he seemed remarkably resilient. Michaela became a protective, appropriate older sister. Their relationship healed over time. Our marriage endured, though scarred. Sarah and I attended counseling together, processing the trauma and fear we had experienced. We learned to trust again, to believe in our daughter's recovery while remaining vigilant. The experience had transformed us all. Years later, Michaela would possess only vague recollections of that terrifying period. The therapy had helped her process and move past it. She matured into a thoughtful, creative teenager with genuine friends and healthy relationships. Mr. Patches became nothing more than a shadowy memory from early childhood. We retained all the therapy records, documentation of that dark time, locked away but accessible if ever needed. The vigilance never fully departed us. We remained alert to any signs of regression. But as time passed, those fears receded into background caution rather than active terror. Our family had survived something unimaginable. We had contended for our daughter's mind and prevailed, retrieving her from whatever dark realm Mr. Patches had symbolized. It had not been effortless or swift, but with love, professional assistance, and unwavering determination, we had reclaimed our little girl. The house felt different now, lighter, safer. The shadows were merely shadows. The night sounds just settling wood and wind. Michaela's laughter rang genuine and clear. Jake grew up knowing only his loving, protective sister. And Sarah and I learned that a family could endure even the darkest moments if they confronted them together. Well, thank you for allowing me to navigate all this strangeness with you. It has been a chaotic and perplexing journey, but I am glad we shared it.